Welcome, everyone. Wow, we can do roll call. It's wonderful. Yeah, but we're gonna get started on time because in addition to the people in the room, we have probably 80 to 90 people on Zoom. So we're quite a crowd, and that's indicative of the interest in this particular topic, I think. And we're delighted to have all of the speakers are going to be sharing with us about the Electoral College. You know, we have a rather unique method of electing our presidents and vice presidents in this country, and it's been a source of some controversy probably ever since they thought of it. So we'll learn a lot more about how that came about and its repercussions tonight. I'm Mari Scala. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. And among other things, I'll do the housekeeping duties and let everyone know that the restrooms are, if you go out of this room, just turn to your right and go down the hall, and they're over there. We are one of the co-sponsors of this event. The other co-sponsor is the American Association of University Women. And Jane Beers is here to tell us about this event and about the woman that it honors, Holly Burgess.
So, AAW, have any of you heard of AAW? Good, some people have. I hope you will maybe look at the display that we put up there that tells you something about AAW and the local branch, which is flourishing. I've been a member for many years, and that's how I knew Holly Burgess. She was a good friend. Some of you may have known Holly because she used to own the Penn Point downtown on Broadway. That means something to some people, maybe. Anyway, so I got to know Holly through that, through AAW, and she was a good friend. And unfortunately, she got cancer and died too young at the age of 61. But she loved all things public policy. And she was definitely a fierce advocate for equality, which is one of the issues that AAW promotes, for equality for women and girls. And she was president of the Columbia branch at the time when she died. And we wanted to remember her and honor her. And so we set up the Holly Burgess Public Policy Forum in 2015. And so this is the 10th annual event. And I'm so happy to welcome you all and do this collaboration with the League of Women Voters. Holly was definitely an active member of both AAW and the League of Women Voters. And so tonight's a perfect way of honoring her beliefs and enthusiasms. So we remember her as a woman of passion and vision. And I'm just delighted that we're all here and people all over the place, all over the country are here to honor her memory.
And our third co-sponsor tonight is the Missouri Civil Liberties Association. Did I get that right? Okay, thank you. And so we thank all of those who helped make this possible. It's now my privilege to introduce our moderator for the evening, and he doesn't need much introduction for the local audience, but I'll read his little bio for the benefit of those who are online. David Lile was the voice of morning radio here in Columbia for more than 25 years on KFRU radio, where he interviewed thousands of people on topics relevant to the Columbia community and topics about local groups, news events, authors, even White House correspondents. He has served as the moderator for many of our local league candidate, issue, and public policy forums for over 10 years, and we're delighted that he agreed to be the moderator this evening. So
thank you. Well, I hope this is working for me. That's the most uncomfortable part of the evening. So let's get to the more comfortable part. I do appreciate the opportunity to take part in these League of Women Voters events. And I remember last year's on the media, and I thought it was really good. And this year I'm looking to be educated quite a bit on the Electoral College, because we had an opportunity to meet with our two distinguished guests via Zoom a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, you can be a part of a conversation and think you kind of know what you feel about something. And then after hearing people that have studied it and taught it for a long time, you start to say, oh, okay, there are other ways to look at this. So I think tonight we're going to see several different vantage points. I'm not sure it's going to change the mind of many in this room, maybe, but at least they're going to be better educated and understand the background of where it came from. I should say happy National Constitution Day, isn't that why we're here? It's National Constitution Day, and I'm appreciative of the fact that the League of Women Voters recognizes that with these special programs. I'm going to introduce both of the professors, and then we'll let Professor Dow be first. His bio online says his research centers on voting and elections. How appropriate, huh? I think you chose the right person to be here. Currently, his primary focus is the development of early United States electoral institutions and processes. And he may or may not say something about some of the writing he's done, including one book called Rethinking the First Party Era Mid-Atlantic U.S. House Elections, 1796 to 1824. I think 1824 is kind of a key year, is it not?
Yes.
And then the other professor is James Endersby, and he also fits in perfectly with the night. He's been with the Department of Political Science at MU since the early 90s. Got his PhD from University of Texas. I think Dr. Dow also did some work down there. So these guys are infiltrators from Texas. And Dr. Endersby specializes in American politics and government, political behavior, voting and elections. So I think you can tell that we have two really good experts. So Dr. Dow studies early on in our history, and I'm hoping what he'll do, and I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's got a slide presentation, is going to talk about maybe why we have the Electoral College, how it came about, what was the thought process, and I'm not trying to guide him too much, but I hope that you can start with the office of the presidency and how the founding fathers said, we want a president, but now we want to decide how to choose that person, because I think unless we start there, we're not going to really understand how it evolved in the conversation of the Electoral College. I may be all wrong. We'll see. One thing I will like to say is if you have your questions, both of these are experienced professors. They're used to having questions during their presentations. We prefer that you would write your questions on the index cards that are on the table, but we're not going to hold that technically. You don't have to abide by that all the time if you're here in the present in the room. And if you're watching on Zoom, if you would put your question through the chat process, the questions will get up to us and we'll try to handle those as we go through the evening. Professor Dow, we appreciate you being here to take part. And we'd like to hear how you'd like to start tonight.
First off, I'd like to simply say thank you to Marilyn and the sponsors for inviting us here tonight. And Professor Endersby, James, who I've known for many, many years, we love to talk about the things that we're going to talk about tonight. And so as I told David, one of the key things is I have the professor disease. And when I start going off into those little tangents, it's okay to slow me down and get me back on track. I study the early United States and political processes in the early United States. That's where my research has taken me over the years. And of course, the EC, the Electoral College, is one of those key institutions. And I love talking about the EC because it is one of those things that both when I have students at the University of Missouri, and especially foreign exchange students, they have so many questions. And they're so curious how we got to this, what seems to be a very peculiar way of electing the United States president, that I just love talking about it in the process that we got here tonight. And what I hope to do is over the next 10 or so minutes, 15 minutes, is give you a little bit of the background to how the EC came to be the manner in which we elect the president. Now, I would like to point out too, before I get too far into this, my affiliation is both with the Truman School of Government and Public Affairs at MU, but the Kinder Institute. And if you love these kinds of events, please take a look at the Kinder Institute webpage. We have a wonderful speaker series that's open to the public. About every 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have nationally prominent speakers come up to the 4th floor of Jesse Hall. It's a great opportunity. You'll always find something on our speaker series that might interest you. So you can't see the top, but the first thing I want to point out is just some general constitutional principles about the founding. And if you remember to the Constitutional Convention, this is the summer of 1787. This is in Philadelphia. The convention is running from May until the middle part of September, until today. In 1787, has anybody spent any time in Philadelphia in the summer? If you were to pick a place that's hotter or more humid than Central Missouri, this is it. And so one thing we think about the Constitutional Convention is that this is taking place in a very unique moment. The framers really did believe that they had a unique moment in world history, not just American history, to do something unique and special. And there was an intellectual atmosphere there that is hard to appreciate today. Now, with respect to selecting the president, the most important thing is that for the framers, the way you select an office is deeply, deeply tied to what you think the purpose of that office is. And an easy way to see this is to think about the Article 3 judiciary. The framers wrote a lot about how to select the judiciary, but the judiciary, one of the things they wanted to do was to have this special kind of selection mechanism that was removed from popular participation, precisely because the job of the judiciary was not to ratify public opinion. And the purpose of the judiciary was to protect political minorities and others. Now, we're not going to talk about the judiciary tonight, but I do want to draw your attention to a comparison between the United States Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives, and the presidency. It's okay if you don't remember the Constitution as it was written in Philadelphia, but think about Articles 1, 2, and 3. Article 1 is the legislative article, 2 is the executive, 3 is the judiciary. Article 1 of the Constitution is half of the document. If you think about the United States Constitution, Congress takes up half of the written words in the original Constitution before we get to amendments. And think about Article 1. Article 1 is immensely detailed. It is immensely precise. You know, you have the establishment of the United States Congress, you have the establishment of the House, you have the establishment of the Senate, you have an article devoted to the proceedings of the House and the Senate, and you have probably most importantly, Articles 8 and 9, or Sections 8 and 9 of Article 1, which are the powers of Congress and the powers denied to Congress. And so if you read Article 1 of the Constitution, you really know what Congress is. You know what Congress does, you know how they do it, you know what they can do, and you know what they can't do, right? So this is and it takes up half of the text. And one of the things I always ask people about the United States Constitution is if you knew nothing else about it, and somebody told you, or you looked at the Constitution and half of the words in Article 1, what does that tell you about how the framers thought about government? They spent a lot of time thinking about Congress. Now let's go to the presidency. Article 2 of the presidency. I don't know the last time you looked at Article 2 of the presidency, but it is short. It is vague. It doesn't have a lot in it. You can read Article 2 of the Constitution and have very little idea of what the United States president is, what the United States president is supposed to do. You get a few things, right? Commander-in-chief of the military, and basically it all pulls together. The president is going to be the primary person to deal with foreign affairs, but you don't know a lot about the president from Article 2. Now, here's an important thing about the Constitutional Convention. Does anybody know who the presiding officer was of the Constitutional Convention? Who's the person at the front of the room saying it's your turn to speak? It's George Washington. George Washington is the presiding officer. So even though the framers really didn't know what the president was, they did know who the first one would be. It's going to be George Washington. So with Article 1, you know what the office is supposed to be, you know its purpose, and this is going to be reflected in selection. We'll get to that in just a second. Article 2, you just know the guy. You know the person who's going to be the president. You know some of the powers of the presidency. But as I've already argued, if selection is tied deeply to the purpose of the office, you've got a tougher job ahead of you with respect to selecting the president. So start with that. Oops, I was supposed to point this someplace. Did I go in the right direction? Okay, there, did I skip one?
No.
Okay, so with that in mind, there were 4 ways, there are actually several other ways, but in the Constitutional Convention, and I should point out, we know this, we know in depth what happened in the convention, because James Madison took detailed notes of the Constitutional Convention. And we also know from their correspondences, we know from the ratification conventions and things of this nature. So we have a lot of confidence in what the framers had to say about how do you select a president. There were essentially 4 ways that were discussed for selecting a president. The first was by Congress. Should the Congress select the president? Now that's kind of familiar to us because most of the Western European parliaments that you're familiar with, the prime minister is selected by the legislature, the majority party in the legislature selects. So if that prevailed, we would have President Johnson today. That would be the way that that would have worked. So why selection by Congress is tied to the job? There was a group of people in the convention who said, look, oops, I lost that, but that's okay. The job of the president is to enforce the laws passed by Congress. The president is the actor whose job it is to enforce the laws. And so therefore, what we want is a president who's selected by Congress so that we can have confidence, along with impeachment, that the president will do what Congress tells. Okay, so the people who advocated this did not have a big independent role in mind for the president, but it was a strong position because we think this is one of the things the president should do is enforce the laws passed by Congress. There was another group that said, no, the job of the president is to represent the interests of the states in the national government. And therefore, what you should have is the president selected either by the state legislatures or by the state governors. And that way the states have agency in the national government. So if that's the job of the president, you want to give the states more of a role in selecting the president. Their legislatures or governors might be ways of doing this. There was a third group out there that said, no, you want, and this is led by people like James Wilson, you want the president to be directly elected by the people. And the reason is that this is going to both provide confidence for the national government in the population, and this is going to strengthen the national government relative to the states. So you can already see where some of these battle lines are going to be drawn in the Constitutional Convention, how strong a national government and the role of the president in that's getting tied up with selection. And the last thing, which we'll spend more of our time talking about in just a bit, is the Electoral College and how that emerged. But the point here is every proposed way of selecting the president was tied to what some delegates thought the job of the president should be. So really, the EC, in the way of selecting the president, doesn't grow out of anything, I shouldn't say it that way, grows out for each group from what they envision the job of the president to be. Now, almost everything I said about the job of the president, I saw people nodding their head, but that's not exactly how it was working then. It was much stronger. Is this what the president should do? Well, we think these are all things the president should do. And so this is going to become part of the debate. Now, I don't know where to point this to switch sides.
I don't know if you have the power when I've got that down there or not.
Maybe somebody could go ahead and switch my, if you could. So these are just some of the arguments about for and against popular election, because I think that's one of the reasons we're here is people are interested in popular election. First off, there are arguments for. Again, James Wilson, I think, is one of the major speakers. I would point to him out of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had a long and democratic process. It had a very egalitarian constitution at this time. And said, you know, this is going to work well. And James Wilson pointed to some other places. He's talking about governors, where governors are directly elected, and this is going to work well. Keep in mind, no southern states had elected governors at this time, or actually through much of early American history. But those are strong arguments. And the argument that he made, one of the arguments that these people made, was this would make the president less dependent on the states. It would establish a national government that was less dependent on the states. Now, go back to the Constitutional Convention. There are people who said, yes, you're right, and that's a bad thing. We don't want that. So again, this has become part of the arguments both for and again against. The arguments against. A big part of the argument was, will the people be informed enough about the characters of people who aspire to the presidency to make good choices? And this is, And this is coming out of New England mostly. The New England delegates to the convention, Roger Sherman being probably the number one guy, but others said, we can't trust popular election of a chief executive. And that's because they're in the background to Shays' Rebellion, and they are very concerned. And New England, despite the storybook of New England as this egalitarian, New England was run by the aristocracy, especially in states like Connecticut. It was very, very hesitant about direct popular rule at this level. But the delegates said, you know, people are susceptible to demagoguery. People are not going to know, you know, who's a good president and things of this nature. And so that wasn't a point of contention. Popular election will destroy the state governments. This is actually part of a larger set of arguments about direct popular election of national offices. And the argument, one of the arguments was that when we create a national government, if the people directly vote for national offices, they will start to see those as more important than their states, and their allegiance will shift from their states to the national government. By the way, Alexander Hamilton is also there, and he's saying, yeah, and that's a really good thing too. So, you know, but not everybody thought that was a good thing, and so this becomes part of the debate. Another point was that no majority is going to coalesce around a single individual. If we open up to popular vote, there's not going to be a majority. Now, some people said, yeah, but a majority is not necessarily a criterion that we want to impose for elections. I mean, the New England states used majority rule elections. If you didn't get a majority in the first round, you went second round, third round, but other states weren't so concerned about that. But this created the problem, the argument being that people will vote for people they're familiar with, they're going to come from their regions, and you're never going to get a majority, which means, you know, popular election won't mean much because we're going to have some other way to kind of sort this out. And the final one is that this is going to make the populous states determine the presidency, that the most populous states will have the final say in the presidency. The small states aren't going to matter that much. And so that's going to be an issue there. Did I get that right? Is that right? Oh, I skipped one. Here's where I like to also, did I get it? I'm
Sorry,
good.
that was my mistake.
Oh, okay.
We're both now working.
This is a point, though, I really do want to dispel one of the images we have about the EC and early republic politics, is that the folks in the room were a bunch of elitists that didn't trust people to make decisions on their own in general. And there certainly were some, I can even name them. There are some people, you know, Roger Sherman keeps coming to mind. Anybody from Connecticut had problems with this, but in general, everybody agreed that you had to have popular input into government. And the way that would manifest depended on the office. And I'd love to use George Mason. He's my favorite participant in the Constitutional Convention because he contributed a huge amount to the final document. And then he's one of only 3 people at the end of the convention said, I can't sign. I don't like it. And I'm out of here. So he worked all summer in Philadelphia. And at the end, he said, nah, this is not working for me. But Mason is the guy. He's a Virginian. If you're not familiar with him, he's a Virginian. He's part of the Virginia aristocracy. And on about the 5th, 6th, 7th working day of the convention, he gives the canonical speech to shut down the guys from New England, saying that we have to have the direct election of the United States House of Representatives. He gives this long impassioned speech at the convention. He says, if we don't directly elect the House of Representatives, then this whole thing is a house of cards. It's going to fall down. It's the wrong thing if you're not going to have popular election of the House. And the reason is he understood the House of Representatives to be that forum. He said, this is going to be our House of Commons. This is the Democratic branch. You have to have this. About a month later, in July, a month and a half later, 6 weeks, they're discussing the EC, they're discussing the presidential selection. And he also gives a canonical speech, and I love this. You guys are nuts if you think that people should be voting for the president. That this is, he says this is like submitting a trial of colors to a blind man. Don't do this. Now, the reason I love these two is George Mason didn't change his mind about people. He was the same understanding of human capacity, what he saw were 2 different offices. Kind of like I was trying to set up with the judiciary a little bit. That one office, you need a lot of direct participation in it, and you've got to have people voting. The other office is so different that you don't want this. Same guy, same views on human democracy, all the 9 yards. But in one case, he says, yes, we want it. No, we don't. Okay. I'm think I'm running a little bit late on this. The bottom line was all of the views that I described about the job of the presidency all got some traction. They all got traction. Everybody kind of said, yes, the job of the president is to do a variety of different things, even though we can't really articulate this in Article 2. And so what the EC emerged at was the way to balance the various objectives that the framers saw in the job of the president. That they could not sustain legislative selection by Congress because that would mean the president would have no independence, just a tool of Congress. Bad idea. But we're going to give Congress a role in this, especially if there's no majority in the EC. Popular participation. We want popular participation, but as Madison said, we want it refined and enlarged. This is his argument about the nature of representation in the House. We want a place for the states to enter the process to preserve or provide a venue for federalism. And so this is what happens is EC comes out as not the perfect solution, but as the solution that balanced a lot of competing objectives about the job of the presidency. So very quick, I'm gonna skip this. Hamilton in Federal 68 says, this is why we got there. But what happened? And this is, I promise I'm getting to the end of this. The election of 1800. The framers made a couple of key mistakes at the Constitutional Convention. And one was what happens if there's a tie in the EC, but a majority. In other words, you have candidates running for the presidency, two of whom, because you got a president and a vice president, tie. This finally happens in the election of 1800 with Thomas Jefferson. So on one hand, you've got Jefferson and Aaron Burr running as Democratic Republicans. You've got Adams and Charles Pinckney running on the Federalist ticket. And Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson have the most votes, but they have the same number of votes. And everybody understood that Jefferson was running as president, Aaron Burr was running as vice president, except for Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, when he realized they were tied, said, hey, I'd like to be president. Yes. And by the way, I'm tied with this guy Jefferson over here. So the House takes 36 ballots to elect Thomas Jefferson as president in 1800. And to make the plot a little more interesting, Alexander Hamilton, of course, Federalist Alexander Hamilton, who did not like Thomas Jefferson, but who did he like less than Thomas Jefferson? He started nudging his Federalist friends around vote, 30 and saying, hey, okay, the devil, and this guy here, Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson wins the presidency in the House of Representatives. Now, this is important because it motivates the 12th Amendment, which is our fix to the EC, where candidates now have to run on tickets, clearly identifying who's the presidential candidate and who's the vice presidential candidate. And of course, you've got the selection of the president through the House and selection of the VP through the Senate. But this is motivated by the election of 1800. By the way, there appeared to be some bad blood now between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. I'm not sure how that sorted out, but they didn't seem to like each other very much. The last thing I'll say about the EC is, well, two things. I'll say one thing about the founding generation. When we get to the 12th Amendment, it's ratified in 1804, which means there are 4 intervening presidential elections. And the 12th Amendment confirmed that even after the framing and even after the election of 1800, that generation, and of course, many of the principles that we're passing at this point, embraced the EC. Nobody stood after the election of 1804 and said, or 1800 and said, we've got to get rid of this silly institution. All the debate was about, we've got to fix this president VP problem. So even as late as 1804, the framing generation was on board with this, or the early generation of Americans. The other thing is that the system that I think almost everybody in this room is probably dissatisfied with, which is sort of the winner take all general ticket approach. This is ubiquitous by the 1830s. By 1832, I think there's only one state left that is not using a general ticket approach the way we use today, except in Maine and Nebraska. So the system you're familiar with. I bet that was one of the kids. So this is a system that's in place. The system we know now is in place by the mid 1820s and established. And so we get this long history that you're familiar with very early in American political history. I mentioned I study these days almost entirely elections in the early United States. I'm useless after 1824, so I'll pass the mic to James. Sorry if I took too long.
No problem. Can I get the clicker?
Oh, clicker, yeah.
And so first, let me thank you for coming and listening in. For those of you online, I appreciate the invitation to speak today, as does Jay, particularly Marilyn and Pam and Sharon work with us a lot to try to get us organized. And thanks to David, who's going to be telling me to shut up. You're taking too long. So I'll say thanks before he does that. As Professor Dow was talking about.
I think it'll work for you now.
Okay. The Electoral College, of course, is created in the Constitutional Convention, and the word at the ratification stage, which Jay briefly talked about, Alexander Hamilton and Federalist number 68. This was his justification for adoption of the Constitution overall, but then also his defense of the Electoral College. And you notice there in the quote that we have from Federalist 68, that the mode of appointment is the Electoral College of the Chief Magistrate of the United States is almost the only part of the system of any consequence which has escaped without severe censure. He also then goes on a little bit further to say, and it's dropped off, yeah, it's right there, sort of in the middle there, for those of you in line, the middle of the second guy, that the manner, that is the manner of the Electoral College of it, if it's not perfect, it's at least excellent. So this was the view from the very beginning, is that this is a system that should work. That's not to say that there weren't constitutional amendments. For instance, Professor Dow, Jay just also talked about the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, where you needed to fix this two ballot system. That could lead and did lead to tie votes. We had to do something about that. There's not many other changes, but there are some changes to the Electoral College after that. One is the 20th Amendment, which reduces the lame duck period between the Electoral College process and when the president takes office. It used to be the president didn't take office until March, and so for 3 months you had sort of no one in there. It also says, what do you do if a president-elect dies before he takes office? When we've got two 80-year-olds running for president, or at least as we did, that kind of thing does become an issue. In fact, it had happened once in history. In 1872, Horace Greeley died between the general election and between the Electoral College decides. And so the 20th Amendment takes into account that. There's also the 22nd Amendment, and it sort of deals with the Electoral College. What it does is talk about eligibility for receiving electors. That is, that you can't be elected more than twice for the president. And then the 23rd Amendment, which I actually may come back to at the very end here, also guarantees electoral votes for the District of Columbia. Every state gets 2 votes for its members in the US Senate. It gets a number of votes equal to the number of representatives it has in the House, and then the District of Columbia gets the minimum of that. So effectively, the District of Columbia gets 3. So it extends the franchise to US citizens who live in the district. It does not extend the franchise to US citizens who live in Puerto Rico or in Virgin Islands or Guam or the other territories. I'm gonna talk briefly about a few notable elections, 3 notable elections. One Jay sort of alluded to already. There was a very bitter campaign in 1824. This is right at sort of the onset of parties. Clearly factions are beginning to form. But at this point, all of these 4 major candidates all call themselves Democratic Republicans to confuse students, generations of students thereafter. So in 1824, and there were many states that did not have popular elections yet. In fact, 1824 is sort of the place between the two. So there were 6 states, I think it was, in 1824 that did not have popular elections. They chose electors through the state legislature directly. In the popular election, Andrew Jackson had more votes than any other. He had the plurality of the votes, but he did not have a majority. What's also interesting, though, is he did not have a majority of the electoral votes either. And the Electoral College, as Jay has described, you have to get a majority of electoral votes to become president. This leads to what we refer to as the contingent procedure. The only real time this has come is in 1824. It is always a threat that could happen. If no candidate wins a majority of votes in the Electoral College, then the top 3 candidates in the Electoral College go to the House of Representatives and they vote on the candidate there. And then the Senate determines who the vice presidential candidate should be. So in the election we have here, we have John Quincy Adams, who, if you know your history, he's going to get elected. Comes in second, basically, in both electoral votes and in popular votes. Andrew Jackson there in the center, the more populist candidate, who's going to sort of form his own political party here shortly, comes in first, both in popular votes and in electoral votes. William Crawford from Georgia comes in third in the electoral votes, although the 4th place candidate, Henry Clay, actually gets more popular votes than Crawford does. So the top 3 candidates go to the Electoral College, and just through that twist of fate, William Crawford actually suffers a stroke. So and we're talking about 1824, so he's basically out of the running at that point. Then it becomes between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, both of whom ultimately become president. So what do? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask somebody in the Jackson camp, they say that John Quincy Adams met secretly in a room with Henry Clay, a big player in Congress at the time, and made a deal that I will nominate you as Secretary of State if you bring in these other states to get me a majority of states in the House of Representatives. Of course, both Adams and Clay deny this. In the end, though, Henry Clay was successful and John Quincy Adams got a majority of the states in the House of Representatives. Now here, each state gets 1 vote, so it's just purely on the basis of states. Just as sort of a side note, John Quincy Adams becomes president. Who does he nominate as Secretary of State? Henry Clay. So that's 1824. And I think of course, Andrew Jackson is fuming after this. And one of the things he does is creates his own section of the Democratic Party. And he is chastised and called dirty names. He is called a Democrat. And Andrew Jackson says, yeah, that's exactly what I am. And so it sort of becomes the formation of what we now call the Democratic Party. So this is the election of 1824. And the biggest caution, the biggest lesson is this contingent procedure of what happens if no candidate wins majority. We're going to come back to that. And just coincidentally, both Adams and Jackson had John C. Calhoun as their vice president, so they never went to the Senate. He got a majority of the Electoral College as vice president. The next election we probably should discuss is the 1876 election between Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, and Samuel Tilden. It was pretty clear on election night. Now, this is the time, by this time, all of the states did have popular votes. The Civil War really changed this. South Carolina never had a popular vote election until after the conclusion of the Civil War. And then I think Florida didn't after, and then it sort of became the constant though. So all the states are now having popular vote elections. It's pretty clear on election night that Hayes is going to lose the popular vote, that Samuel Tilden actually wins a plurality. But other things are clear too. It's also, this is 1876, so this is a little more than a decade after the conclusion of the Civil War. What's also clear is that certain southern states, maybe many southern states, were engaged in voter suppression. And when I say voter suppression, it's not like requiring a photo ID. No, that's not voter. When you murder people, when you engage in violence against Black Americans, when you keep them from the polls, that's the kind of voter suppression that we're talking about. And so it's also pretty clear that there was violence and intimidation against Black Americans, the former slaves that now had voting rights in the South. So Tilden does win the majority popular votes. In fact, he wins over 50%, not a lot more, but it wins over 50%. And the election returns from 3 states in particular are in dispute, from Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. And so it's not clear, and this brings that back echoes of what certain administrations may claim, even in the contemporary era. It's not clear whose electoral votes actually count. The Democrats say they won these 3 states, the Republicans say they won these 3 states. Congress kind of punted, I guess they dealt with it as best as they could in 1876. What they did is create an independent bipartisan commission to make the determination of which set of electoral votes should be used. There were 5 members from the Senate, 5 from the House of Representatives, and 5 members of the Supreme Court. Allegedly, there are 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans with 1 independent. The 1 independent was David Davis on the Supreme Court, who was nominated by Abraham Lincoln. So whether he's really independent or Republican, I don't know. And the commission voted 8-7. Straight along party lines, with Davis voting for the Republicans, that Hayes, the Republican, should be awarded all of the electoral votes from these 3 states. This then went to Congress to be agreed upon, and that led to a lot of controversy. And it went to what's often referred to as the Compromise of 1887. Something that's sort of informal, but also binding. The compromise within Congress, and it's not the contingent procedure, but it's Congress that's making this determination. And Congress agrees to this condition that Hayes gets the electoral votes and wins the election if Hayes will also end Reconstruction in the South. Most historians agreed that if the election was fair, Hayes in fact would have probably won the majority of the popular vote. He would have racked up a lot of votes in the South and these 3 states, and arguably he would have won these 3 too. But it does lead to this controversy. It does lead to the end of Reconstruction. After his election, that's exactly what Hayes does. He pulls all the federal troops away from the South. This is not, he was a Reconstructionist. He did not want to do this. It was just part of the deal. And to be fair, Samuel Tilden was from New York. He was not with the Southern Democratic Coalition either. It was really 2 candidates stuck in a horrible position. But Hayes did win the electoral vote by 1 vote, 185 to 184. I'll go to another presidential election, which many of you may remember. And in fact, the lesson in 2000, where it came very close, Al Gore does win a slight majority of not a majority, a minority, but he comes in first place in the popular vote. George W. Bush comes in second. It all comes down to Florida, which is neck and neck all the way through. And you may even remember the phrase from election night, Florida, Florida, Florida. It all comes down to that. The issue here was not corruption, but the use of voter technology. And in particular, it's, what are these? Punch card ballots, that's right. Where you actually put a punch in them. I voted on punch card ballots, not in Florida, and I also had a spoiled ballot. It didn't work right for me too. So this was really the issue of voter technology, especially punch card ballots. And then you may also remember what it came down to, some famous pictures, which will probably jog your memory of trying to determine voter intent for each and every one of these punch card ballots with these strange votes. If that was me, I would never have agreed to have you take a picture. A later confirmation by Miami Herald and another newspaper circuits actually did suggest that George W. Bush did in fact win the Florida election. It's very close by just a few hundred votes, but he did win. There was an initial report and then a subsequent report, which as I recall was released on the evening of September 10th, 2001. And sort of everybody forgot about this the next day. So there are a number of problems. I'm going to try to go over these pretty quickly. Well, there are issues. I put down issues or problems. It all is on your perspective, right? States set election rules, not the federal government. In our system, the federal government does not determine how, where, and when we vote for the most part. There are bounds of what can be done and so forth, but by and large, it is states that holds the regulation. That's true generally in Article 1 that Jay was talking about. It specifically says that states are in charge of congressional elections. In Article 2, where it talks about the Electoral College, it says each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, and the electors shall meet in their state. So it's all a state-focused system. That's something to remember as we talk about what we might do to change the Electoral College. Another problem is, and Jay also alluded to this too, is the unit rule of the winner-take-all position. This is a constitutional tradition or a constitutional practice that is not required by the US Constitution, but it's what we have sort of led with. What voters are thinking they're doing when they go into the voting booth or fill out their mail ballot is often hidden. This is a ballot actually from Cape Girardeau County. It looks like I'm voting for president if I'm a voter in Cape Girardeau. That's what it looks like. That's what the ballot looks like. Other states do have different ballots. This is a ballot from Oklahoma, and this is in 2016. I couldn't find it 2021. But in Oklahoma and in some other states, they actually list the electors on the ballot. So you are aware that's what I'm voting for, is this slate of electors, not for the president. And for a variety of reasons, just simplicity, cost, and so forth, many of states have removed that. Certainly, I remember as a kid, they were always on the electors were always on the ballot. We're into a time where there have been some states that use something different. Maine and Nebraska now use the congressional district measure, where you win 2 electoral votes if you win the state, a presidential candidate, and you win 1 for each congressional district that you win. And they're both relatively small states. They're both rather odd states for a couple of reasons. But nevertheless, that's something that's been true in the past too. That was true in the 1820s in New York. New York used to actually split. It's also true in Alabama in 1960, which I'll be very provocative. You're really going to hate me when I get to 1960 in a moment. The thing that most people don't like is electoral inversion, a fancy name for when the winner actually ranks second in terms of popular votes. Now, this has happened up, and as I'm saying the slide here, up to 6 times, because you could argue about some of these. The first one is 1824. We talked about that. Well, yeah, it kind of is, kind of 1876. Well, no, yeah, it kind of is, kind of is. Okay, in 1888, it's pretty clear that was the case where one switched. And then, of course, many of you know in 2000 and 2016, these are also cases of electoral inversion. Many of you may not want to know that 1960 is also a case, and this is where many of you are going to hate me. John Kennedy did not win the plurality votes. Richard Nixon actually did. This is from a scholarly work that went back and looked at returns, and the stuff that we read in all our reference books indicate that Kennedy got the majority, but in some other states, Alabama and Georgia, Kennedy was not always the vote getter for the Democratic votes. That it was Harry F. Byrd in Alabama. In fact, maybe it was in Georgia. He was on the ballot in Georgia too. But anyway, they were Democratic votes, but Kennedy didn't win those votes. Nixon actually got the plurality of votes, something which Richard Nixon was very well aware of. To go back to this though, this isn't unusual. And if we think this is a really noticeable kind of thing, but it isn't unusual. I also study North American politics, Canadian politics, and you may recognize this fellow. Here's Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. In the last 2 elections, the Liberal Party, now the Prime Minister is elected, it's a different system. He's elected through his party. He's not elected at large. But in parliamentary democracies, which are also democratic societies, which have an executive official, it can well be that it leads to this problem of inversion. That in 2019, the Conservative Party actually won more votes than the Liberal Party, but the Liberal Party wins more seats. And so Justin Trudeau is then selected as the prime minister at that time. It's not just freakish about 2019, it also happened in 2021, same thing. The Conservative Party actually received more votes than the Liberal Party in Canada, even though the Liberal Party forms the government and Justin Trudeau becomes the prime minister. So we may think this is very strange, but if we look at other democratic states, it's not that unusual, this idea of electoral inversion. That doesn't mean we want it, but it's not unusual at all. Another big problem that we may identify is minority vote winners. That is just a president gets a minority of the votes. It's the plurality, it's the most votes, but that candidate does not win a majority of the popular vote, but that candidate does win a majority of the electoral votes. That's happened a lot, somewhere between a third and a half of all elections. In fact, one of the arguments for the Electoral College is it takes minority winners and exaggerates their margin and creates majorities in the Electoral College. Sometimes, 2016, doesn't work that way, but most of the time it goes exaggerating in that way. If we're going to talk about minority presidents, just to identify sort of the top three, or let's say the bottom three, the three presidents with the lowest share of popular vote. The first one was this fellow here, Abraham Lincoln, has the all-time low of popular votes. He did not even break 40%. It was an election with three other competitive candidates at the time. The next one is Woodrow Wilson in 1912, the first election that Wilson has. He gets about 42% of the vote. And the next lowest is Bill Clinton, who only gets 43% of the vote in 1992. Now do keep in mind, in all three of these cases, there were at least three major candidates running. Ross Perot in 92, Teddy Roosevelt. So there are other issues to this, but it's something, again, for us to keep in mind when we get to solutions. Another issue is the so-called faithless elector. That is a person who does not vote as expected. With the unit rule, the party of the president gets all of the electors. We assume that all of those party members are going to support the popular vote winner in that state, but it doesn't always happen. For instance, in 2016, Donald Trump got 304 electoral votes. Hillary Clinton got 227. Those of you who are really good at math and really quick, that doesn't add up to 538. That adds up to 531. That's because in 2016, there's those two. And then there are also 7 other electoral votes that were cast for someone else. And there's from both sides, 2 from the Republicans and 5 from the Democrats. What's clear about 2016 is even that those strong party stalwarts, many of them had difficulty with these 2 candidates. The biggest problem that we've probably identified is this problem with Electoral College minority, that nobody wins a majority of the electoral votes. That throws it into the House of Representatives to choose the president, to the Senate to choose the vice president. It's only happened twice. And Jay has talked about 1800, kind of an unusual case, and that's not going to come up again because we fixed that. 1824, kind of an unusual case, could come up again. There's nothing that says it couldn't. And I think if I were to sort of write my mini-series, my political mini-series, it would be, there's no candidate wins a majority in the Electoral College, and then what happens then? So that's sort of the biggest problem. And there are lots of possibilities for that. It could just be third-party candidates. That's one way to cause this, a significant third-party candidate who gets that. Faithless electors could possibly do this. That was at least the fear back in 2016, that the faithless electors would lead to no candidate winning. And then another possibility, keep in mind, there are 100 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, 435 members of the House, 535, but then you get 3 votes from DC, which means it's an even number of electoral votes. It's also possible to get a tie. It's not likely, but it is possible. CNN has put up a couple, in fact, this is from CNN, a couple of the possibilities where we could get a tie, 269 in the upcoming election. That would also work well. That's season 2 in my series. So let me throw out some proposed solutions, and rather than getting David upset at me, I'm just gonna throw them up, and they all have big problems, but we'll handle that in discussion, I think is more appropriate. One is that we just abolish the Electoral College. We have popular vote elections. And I even have a whole list of things prepared for why, in case you want to talk about that. That could lead to a lot of problems, but that's certainly one solution. Another solution is, why don't we take the state electoral votes and assign them proportionally? So if you win 60% of the vote, you win 60% of the electoral votes. Of course, the problem is third-party candidates kind of mess up that formula. And then plus, without getting into the mathematical details, and both Jay and I do formal models. We do mathematical models of polls, so we could start putting up equations if you really wanted, but just take it from us that there's a mathematical problem. It's the same mathematical problem of apportionment. The states can benefit or lose out for different apportionment schemes. We've sort of met our standard, but back in 2010, it depends on, Missouri lost one seat. All depends on how you calculated it. Because if you used a different rule, we wouldn't have lost that seat. So it's a mathematical problem. And in any case, someone's vote is still also wasted. The congressional district plan, which we alluded to earlier about Nebraska and Maine, is one possibility. I think if I were choosing something for reform, that's what I would choose. But also notice it's the smaller states that are doing this. You know, are you really going to convince California to do this? Because right now, California is 55 vote block for the Democrats. And are the Democrats in California going to say, no, we're going to give 10 or 12 of those to the Republicans? That's sort of the problem that you're encountering with the congressional district plan. Another possibility is an initiative for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That's basically an agreement of states. We're all going to vote for the popular vote winner and not vote for the winner of our own state. We're going to vote for the popular vote winner. I think the problems, well, I just said I wouldn't talk about the problem. The problem there is enforcement. There's a great incentive to defect. Plus, it's still simply a popular vote system, which has other problems too. One other possibility is, let's eliminate this faithless elector problem. Let's require people to vote for their party. We can impose a fine or even a criminal penalty. Unfortunately, Supreme Court seems to be pretty clear. I mean, there's not a definitive case, but it's pretty clear. The Supreme Court says you can't do this. Electors have voting rights just like you have voting rights. You can vote for whoever you damn want. You can't impose criminal penalties if people do things in a certain way, which is also a problem for the interstate compact too. My favorite change, which is really simple and eliminates this 269 and 269, is we could change the size of the House of Representatives so it's an even number. Then there's going to be an odd number of electoral votes. That's one problem checked off. Just what goes on within the House when you choose a party, that's another problem, but it's not an Electoral College problem. It's 50-50 in the House of Representatives. And with that, I could talk more about any of these things, but David, you're gonna.
All right, well, let's go back to something you just did on that screen right there. The very top one, it says popular vote election, which would take a constitutional amendment. I think that would be difficult to get, but you said that there are problems with that. I think we'd like to know what's the problem with having people vote, and whoever gets the most votes is our president.
It's the same problem that we have for Congress and state legislature and every other office. The problem is, what's the winning number? Is it just more votes than anybody else? Or do you have to win a majority? We already know that at least a third of the time, presidential candidates now don't receive a majority. If we were to open it up to popular vote, we're probably going to get something more like the Democratic and Republican candidates, where we get something like 16 to 20 candidates all running in the election. So do we accept somebody who gets only 40% of the vote? What about only, say, 25% of the vote? In the Republican primary, just a few weeks ago, there were 9 candidates for governor, and the governor got less than 40% of the vote, the Republican nominee. For Secretary of State, to go to the most sort of extreme, there were 8 candidates running, and the winner got 24.4%. Is that what we want?
But wouldn't the party conventions narrow down the list of candidates for
Maybe.
president and vice president?
Certainly maybe, but we could also have 8, 10 parties. One could easily imagine that the Republican Party is going to split into 2 lanes.
But I think a lot of
Democrat
people would say, why not? Because I would agree with you. I'd hate to get a president elected with 20 or 30%, or maybe even, 40%, but we lucked out with Lincoln, I suppose. So, but maybe we could do preferential voting, which I like that idea for a lot of elections. We don't seem to be open to that in this state, but places do that and it works.
That's right. That is on the ballot in Missouri in the upcoming election, but there are a lot of alternatives. So maybe not plurality. Maybe we have a runoff, that just the top 2 go to a runoff. Maybe it's ranked choice voting. If you're interested in that, I've got a book coming out in January. That's a great Christmas gift. It could be approval voting, which is what they use in St. Louis City and well, in the primary stage of St. Louis City, and they use it in Fargo, North Dakota too. That's also an easy system. Or cumulative voting. The thing is, if we're going to talk about a popular vote, maybe we should look at a whole lot of other kinds of systems and not just the plurality vote that we're used to. I think there are also bigger problems with close elections. If an election is really close, it's not Florida. We'll be looking at every precinct in the entire country to try to squeeze out those few extra votes. I think that's a problem. I also think there's a problem with representation, that if it's truly popular, now again, I'm thinking primarily about plurality or majority. The other systems are a little different, but if it's plurality or majority, that suddenly here in the Midwest, we don't count anymore. All the votes are on the coast. And so the campaigns are going to be focused. I'm not saying we don't count now. That's definitely one argument too.
And I read someplace though, that the way it is now, there are 7 states that basically are going to get a huge amount of attention for this election. So you've already got the attention narrowed down. And in some ways also, I've read that there's a district in Nebraska, there's a district in Maine that are becoming overwhelmingly focused because they are going to be crucial. So we're already at that point where the attention is just given to that. And we are mostly ignored.
Yeah, I think Jay, he's being quiet here. I think he may agree with me. I like the congressional district plan, actually. How we would impose that is more difficult, but your point comes out as suddenly Omaha, thank you. Suddenly Omaha becomes more important.
Or a very small place in Maine that has just a handful of people. And the other argument that I've read was, and I'll get to questions in a second, the other argument I've read, what you were saying about precinct by precinct becomes this intense focus, saying, were you counting correctly? Yes, but if you have an election that is run well, which most authorities would say the 2020 was a pretty secure election, even though some are saying it wasn't, you take the focus off of Georgia now and what is just a laser focus on whether they ran their election well or not. When you broaden it out so that you've got the whole country voting on a popular vote, you wouldn't have that extreme legal focus to try to say you did this wrong and you can change the whole election if we can just get this one state under control.
My hunch is though that it will be happening everywhere. That they'll be searching for votes in Chicago, they'll be searching for votes in Alabama and Texas and California. We'll just be, because now if it's a really close margin, then we'll be searching votes absolutely everywhere. And although I like ranked choice voting, it's gonna be hard to implement on this level, but the last thing I should point out is what we should do is we should think about these things and discuss them. We should be more forward thinking rather than just saying, let's get rid of the Electoral College. The bigger question is, and replace with what? And that was the founder's dilemma. And that's our dilemma today.
I think and I hope, I don't know if everybody, suppose they do, because the league I know has, and Marilyn's just chomping at the bit to jump in here. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, I think is an interesting thing. But Missouri in 2016 would have had a fit in all likelihood because the state voted for Donald Trump. The country voted for Hillary Clinton. If we were a part of that compact, our votes would have gone to Hillary Clinton. And so you would have looked at a bunch of people in this state saying, wait a second, we didn't vote for that. But we had joined into this compact saying whoever gets, and it's a way to dodge a constitutional amendment, difficulty of a
Yes.
constitutional amendment. It's saying it's too difficult to change the Constitution with an amendment. So let's do this national popular vote interstate compact. And we won't have to change that. We'll just get the states to agree that whoever wins the popular vote nationwide gets our state's electoral votes. I suppose everybody understood that. If you have written down questions, raise your hand and put them up. If not, yell it out really loud and I'll try to repeat.
My vote was canceled twice in this state, and your example of the state being for the other guy and not for Hillary, they would have just gone bananas because, you know, this national popular vote would have changed, but under the current system, I have felt absolutely disenfranchised.
I think a lot of us feel like when we vote in the state, we're wasting our time unless it's maybe a county vote. But other than that, statewide votes, you're losing them all the time, oftentimes, if you're voting a certain party. I don't think we can assume that everybody in here is voting a blue ticket.
Well, wherever you are, so if you're in California and your electoral votes go to a Democrat, but you're a Republican, so you're gonna feel your votes are lost. So it's a non-issue because somebody's gonna win and somebody's gonna lose.
Oh, the states will take that to court all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I
Well,
mean,
why wouldn't they do that now?
because, I mean,
It would be the way the system was set up. So the states have to decide on the national popular vote compact. Are you familiar with that? Is a new idea that came about 2000. To use the Electoral College, because that's required by the Constitution, because it is so hard to change the Constitution. We're still waiting for the ERA for those of us who states can decide that their electors would vote for whoever wins the popular vote nationally as opposed to in their own state. So a certain number of states have already enacted that in their own legislatures. And so there's 209 electoral votes that have already been committed to that concept out of 270. So they can't do anything until there's 270. So that is a possibility, and it would mean that every person's vote counts as opposed to worrying about 6 states. You know, if we just watch the news these days, that's all we see is concentration on small areas. And so I have to say, because I'm here for the League of Women Voters, the League of Women Voters believes that this is a good option to do. They actually have what they call their moonshot goal is to actually abolish the Electoral College. So I know that would be disturbing, but
Well, yeah,
yeah.
I'm not quite sure it's
impossible.
that. I think what we would say is you need to think things through. What are you gonna replace it with?
Right.
And one of the things about, I'm not taking a position really one way or the other. I personally, I like a lot of things about the EC, but as far as constitutional amendments are concerned, and one of the reasons they're so difficult is the framers really wanted the constitutional amending process to be reserved for times when there is national consensus that there is a problem with the Constitution. The last thing you want to do is to dodge and weave around the Constitution when there's not a national consensus. And so the Constitution is intentionally difficult to amend for a variety of reasons, but that's the main one. But if you think about the constitutional amendment process, really the amendments have come in the face of broad consensus that we've got some problems. And so you can think about the first 10 amendments, of course, which were necessary as part of an agreement to ratify the document itself, the Bill of Rights. You can think about 13, 14, 15 coming in the wake of the Civil War and what we would call the second founding of the United States. You can think of the amendments that came about because of issues in the presidency, many of which James pointed to. And so I have a number of concerns with this idea of a national compact. Some of this are just very practical concerns, like I don't believe it's enforceable under the Constitution. And I can't see a situation where a state would do something like if we voted one way, but we're going to cast our EC votes in another way. But I think the issue is can a intellectual environment be created such that people agree that the EC is anachronistic and it needs to be replaced with something else, which we have to think about very seriously what that something else is, and then move to a constitutional amending process. If you think about the difference between the United States Constitution and let's say the Missouri Constitution. We call the Missouri Constitution, but let's keep in mind it's got riverboat gambling in it, right? This is not the same kind of document as the United States Constitution, and changing something so profoundly important to our American political history, I think really does require broad national consensus. And when you start proposing things that we can dodge and weave around the Constitution by doing this, that, and the other thing, that gets a little bit problematic because it starts to move the document away from a foundational governing document to a obstacle that we're trying to figure out all the different ways we can get around it. So that's one of my concerns about the EC. If we agree as a nation, many of us agree that the EC is problematic, I think constitutional amendment is the way to go. We amend the Constitution, but that requires those of us that are those of you that are opposed to the EC or want something else to make compelling arguments that will convince people there are better ways to elect the president. And I do think that has to be tied to the kind of arguments that were made in the founding generation.
How does that not refer to the status quo? I mean, given you've got the minority states that have got restraint, but Montana, we are told,
And I'm going to guess, by the way, judging from this room, that all of you were in meetings opposing the Electoral College in the 80s and early 90s, right? Does anybody remember when I've been here long enough? I've been in Missouri since 1992, when Missouri was the bellwether.
Yes.
Yeah, you remember that? That we were, and that's another point that I like to make is we kind of believe that the political world is static and it's never going to change. And of course, when I first arrived here, it was all this national attention on those 7 states. We were one of those 7 states. So.
I have a question about the electors and the faithless electors. One is, why did they write the Constitution so that they weren't bound to vote a certain way? And my concern would be that we need to look at the electors who are going to be representing our whatever state it is and say, are they going to be honest and truthful to vote a certain way? And that's not an alternative list of electors which is going through the court system now. This is the true list of electors.
This is a wonderful question, and it is one of the things that changed, and probably if Madison is looking down on us and Hamilton, and especially I point you to Federalist number 68 that James and I both appealed to, this is something they really didn't get. If you think of the Hamilton quote that I put up, they really anticipated in the convention that electors would be selected in such a manner that they would truly deliberate about the merits of people who might be president. And this is one of the reasons why the electors can never meet together outside with other states. The electors cannot be in the room with electors from other states. That is a constitutional prohibition. They have to meet in their state capitals. And in fact, one of the things that's interesting is NPR every year seems to find an elector who believes that they're going to Washington DC to cast a ballot. And they have to tell them, you're going to Jeff City. This is where you're going. And the reason they got that, they were like, is they didn't anticipate how quickly political parties would form. And the political parties would start to drive the EC process. And that is the change that has occurred.
In fact, the current electors tend to be just people who've done a lot of party service.
Yeah.
That's sort of like your reward after putting
Yeah.
in so long that you get to be an elector. But that may not indicate devotion to a particular president or candidate either.
So again, I think that this speaks for several. They want to have you restate the problem with the national popular vote.
Yeah, well, there are several. One is, what is the decision rule to determine the winner? If it is a plurality rule, right, that's just that's what we use for most of our elections is the plurality rule. That's probably gonna lead to a lot of deep controversy within the United States. Because we're just throwing up to whoever gets more votes than anyone else, there's all the incentives for 18 different people to run. All of whom are gonna get, 7-8% of the vote. And then the problem is, or is that going to, are you really comfortable with somebody that only wins 20% of the vote?
I don't think it, because the party chooses who they want.
But that's not in the Constitution, unless you're gonna put that in. Parties aren't in the Constitution,
I understand.
and so that's a major shift.
And you might remember, about party control in 2016. The very first intra-party debate, televised debate in 2016. How many Republicans were on the stage that day? And the party said, if you got a name somebody recognizes, you get to come. I'm not gonna out this person. But in an airport, I ran into a very, very high-ranking Republican official not too long after that. And he was near tears because they put a lot of people on the stage and one emerged as very charismatic that nobody expected. And that it created a lot of indigestion. Parties don't have as much ability, and that's the other thing about parties, is probably many of you know that you are party, party volunteers and so on. Parties are very state level organizations, and so there's not nearly as much control at the national level as you might think there is, especially if there's a regional favorite or somebody who's coming out of a different tradition. This is not the day of you serve in the United States Senate for 22 years and then you're the obvious person to tap on the shoulder. Think about recent presidents. So you never know who might emerge from Hollywood, New York, a small town in Arkansas. There's a lot of things out there.
But it's tough because we are sold on the idea of kind of ranked choice voting by bringing more into the fold to give more voices as candidates.
The only thing that I really worry about, if we have another election where the person who wins the popular vote doesn't win the Electoral College, that people already, we have very low percentage of people who vote. And so they will just be disheartened in such a way that they will really say, my vote doesn't count, because even though the person that I voted for got all the votes, or the majority, and still lost because of this system that was set up in 1787. So that's the part that I feel personally, and I know that's what the League of Women Voters feels, is that one person, one vote, doesn't matter where you live, you should have that ability to cast your ballot and it have meaning. And that we have not seen the rise of lots of political parties, to be honest. It takes so much money, so I don't know, I'm not that worried about it, but I have to say I'm not an expert at all. So that's just my gut feeling. But I really worry about this next generation just saying, why bother? And I'm too old, I'm not gonna see the Constitution change, you know, but I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that everybody does care about their ballot and that it is meaningful. So,
Be interesting to know, and there's no way to do this, if they were crafting the system now, would they do the same thing? If we were responsible for that and the current conditions, would we do that? I don't know, nobody can
If
tell.
I could, if I could, mention Marilyn's comment, the one good thing is though, let's not be too negative. Turnout was up in 2018. In fact, it skyrocketed from the midterm election, and turnout was up in 2020. Whatever you may think about Donald Trump, he draws people to the polls, not necessarily for his vote for him, but he draws people to the polls. So I understand the concern. It is a legitimate concern, but the evidence is actually that more people are voting.
We're about 10 minutes away from when we're saying we're gonna wind up, but we'll go here.
I tried to write this down, but it was too complicated, so, I was interested in your suggestion about the congressional district representation in the Electoral College. And the thing that is, my question about that is, since in Missouri anyway, the legislature determines the congressional districts and can pack all of one party into two districts or whatever. How would that be, in the light of gerrymandering, how could that be a fair system?
Well, they are related, but if in Missouri, probably there are gonna be at least 2 votes that go for the Democratic candidate, and the rest will probably go for the Republican candidate, but otherwise, probably all of the votes are gonna go for the Republican candidate. You are absolutely right that this gerrymandering enters into the drawing of district, but there are lots of Supreme Court regulations over how we draw those districts. We don't want to go into those right now, but there are lots of restrictions.
And there's nothing that says these have to correspond to congressional districts. In other words, if you district for EC voters, now I would expect that any state legislature, whether it's in Missouri or any other state, would draw districts for political advantage, because it turns out that legislatures do that. But the Supreme Court has placed parameters on districting. The most important, of course, is they'd have to have equal population. That's a fundamental requirement. But I think James and I both like this system because it preserves, in I think at least my mind, the essential features of the EC with recognizing within state diversity and heterogeneity, and the districts capture that. And we have the 2 urban districts in Missouri and the balance of the state. And so you would see something that looks like a divided EC vote that has some correspondence to population.
But it's interesting.
The legislature could institute those rules.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, constitutionally.
Candidate from 44 is very interested in promoting this kind of thing. It is the people.
But it's interesting, the governor of Nebraska is saying he favors the winner take all, so he wants to change.
Yeah.
He wants to go back. Yeah.
And Maine's has said, if they change, we'll change.
Yeah,
So they want to make it all 50 states doing the winner take all, rather than any states moving towards this other system, which I think makes sense, the other system, but those that are in power would like to keep power.
We watched, the League of Women Voters spent a lot of time during the redistricting, this last redistricting. We attended, Sharon, for sure, we attended, because they've done different ways, the congressional districts in the state. And that we happen to have 2 Democrats and 6 Republicans right now. I don't know that that would be guaranteed. I think that it's quite possible that there would be gerrymandering, and that would take away even more power of the people.
Wonder if anybody's done the study nationwide, if it had been implemented, what Nebraska and Maine do now, how the vote would have turned out, the electoral, that'd be a good.
I would assume just the breakdown of the House combined with the Senate vote would be.
Yeah, it's almost, you could say, the breakdown in the House of Representatives is how it goes. Now, it's not, it's
Not quite.
yeah, not quite, but vaguely, yes.
So very close.
Very close to whatever's in the House, which means very close in this last election, yes.
Yeah, with this academic panel, I'm not ready to necessarily declare that I'm an advocate for majority rule, although the whole idea about one person, one vote is attractive. But to get away from this plurality idea, and to appeal to Occam's razor for the electorate throughout the entire country. We might want to lean in that direction in terms of, there are problems involved in implementing this and changing the rules and so on and so forth. But it is a more pure system, and it might appeal to the American electorate, the extent to which they get involved in these elections and these nuances.
How about proportionate allocation of the state's electorate according to the popular vote in that state instead of by congressional district?
Well, of course, you can do that today. You just have to convince the people in Jeff City, that's what
Well, that could be done by national law, and it's operation of the electoral college, it's not a constitutional change.
I think that would require, it would require a constitutional change, because the Constitution says the state legislatures will determine, so it still has to be done through the state legislatures. And James made a very important point. In the United States, we talk about national elections, but what we really have are 50 state elections. And so you would have to convince the states. Probably one of the constraints, we've already mentioned this with the idea of a national compact or something like this, is another reason the system emerged very early was the states were concerned about their votes being diluted in the national framework. And so if you present a unified state vote for the presidency, that raises the profile of the state in the calculation, whereas if you would present a divided vote, then it becomes a little less. But again, all of these proposed changes are within the purview of the state legislatures. And that's another important thing. The Constitution places the administration of elections at the state level. And so with, obviously, one person, one vote, so equal population districting and things like this, but many of these things that people I think are in favor of can be petitioned at Jeff City. Now, whether the Jeff City is going to do something like that is a different issue.
The state legislature divided the county right down the middle in its congressional districts.
So before we're out of time, this is another question that's been handed to me. So we talk about the electors. How do we know who the electors are for Missouri? They don't probably show up on the ballot, but people who'd like to know ahead of time and investigate them.
They are just distributed by the parties themselves, so you can see it there. The more active process is if you participate in your political party, you usually get to vote for these people at the state conventions or whatever. States do vary in terms of how they're selected, but it's all based on the political parties.
All right, we're almost done. I don't know, 2 questions. Oh, yeah, I'll give it to you since you're so important in this group.
We haven't really addressed the inequality in terms of the population represented per electoral college vote, which I understand there's a huge discrepancy, like 100 and some odd thousand people for each electoral college vote in Wyoming versus 600,000 in other states. Is that a required element of the system as it's set up constitutionally, or do you do anything about that?
It is, because the Constitution says the state's electoral college vote is a function of its entire congressional representation. So of course you have the 2 senator issue. So the 2 senator, Wyoming gets 3 EC votes because of 2 US senators. And again, this is why I direct people back to the founding and the idea of providing input at the state level into the electoral college. If I might ask one favor, I know we want to shut this down really, but David Luthold has his hand up, and since he taught us everything we know, I think Professor Luthold should get the last question and to stump us, because I know he's going to do it.
There you go.
I was going to ask you the arguments for and against ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice voting.
Generally, or for the electoral college in particular?
Generally.
Generally.
It's on the ballot.
Yeah, I've written a whole book on this, so I'm gonna take too long. There are a lot of advantages and a lot of disadvantages. Most of the things that people claim that are gonna happen with ranked choice voting, don't really come true. But it is a reasonable system where more people can express more preferences. And if that's important to us, then ranked choice voting is a reasonable alternative. I can't say too much more because it is on the ballot and I work at the University of Missouri and we're not allowed to take political positions on ballot questions. But it seems to me to be a reasonable option for a lot of communities and a lot of environments. It'd be a bit difficult to use that for the Electoral College, but if Maine were to go back to its old system, their intent is to apply ranked choice voting to whoever wins the 4 electoral votes from Maine. I mean, that's their intent, is if they go backwards away from the congressional district line, they'll also apply ranked choice voting to it.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to our professors Jay Dow and James Endersby. They need a round of applause. Thank you. About also to everybody from the League of Women Voters who put these events together. They are very much appreciated. So thank you all also. Great crowd in the room tonight and also a great crowd listening via Zoom. Is this available to people if they want to see it?
It's being recorded.
It's recorded, so it'll be on the website for the League of Women Voters, Columbia, Boone County. Thank you all. What's that? YouTube channel. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here tonight.
I really appreciate it. It was